we're going to be talking about what are the must-have soft skills for employment in the modern workforce, especially today talking to the people who are blind or visually impaired. And as a lot of these skills that we're going to be talking about, the conversation is going to be tailored towards that and the unique things that we have to deal with, focus on day in and day out. And these soft skills are the foundational things that we have found to be really crucial for success in employment. But as you'll see in our conversation, these really apply to anywhere in life. So, who is this webinar for? This webinar is going to be focusing on people who are blind or visually impaired that are looking to reach their career goals, are looking for key skills and tips for career success, are maybe having challenges learning how to navigate the employment process or your career path, and are just looking for ways to personally develop to be able to reach your goals. So, what's the challenge that we are kind of facing and approaching? Well, why even have this conversation? First of all, like I mentioned, there are unique challenges that we can face in the blind community when we are looking to reach our career goals. It can be difficult to know the things that we need, the barriers that we may have to overcome, how to figure them out. Plus, it can be really complex to try to explain and express the needs we may have and what obstacles that we're facing and how to communicate that to others. Also, there are many different barriers when trying to just be involved in employment, aside from all the other things that it's just hard enough for anybody to find a job and seek employment. And we have found that that's kind of some of the biggest challenges that we want to address in this conversation. Laverne, are there any other areas that you would say is kind of the challenge that we want to focus on that we're approaching?
I think we're good.
Cool, sounds good. So, in terms of looking at the solution, Laverne, at a high level, what are these soft skills that we want to cover that we is kind of the solution to this challenge that we're going to be going through?
So the soft skills we're looking at is advocacy, and that's self-advocacy, communication, which then leads to participation, and all these are connected. So it's not like you can separate them out and put them in different boxes. They affect each other throughout the course of our life, whether it's for employment or community participation, going to the grocery store, doesn't matter. These three things interact.
Yes, absolutely. So, advocate, communicate, participate. That's really what we're going to focus on in going through some examples to give skills, strategies, and help build confidence so that we all can better approach these areas when navigating employment and really anywhere in life. Awesome. So, first of all, why even listen to us? Why do we care about this? How do we know about it? We want to first just give a little more of an introduction of ourselves on why this area is so important for success in employment and reaching your goals. So, to give a quick overview on my story, I grew up with perfect vision, and at the age of 16, a condition called LHON caused me to go through severe central vision loss. And when I was in high school and my vision loss was starting, people quickly told me I had to advocate. And people kept harping on this word advocate that I never really heard about until then, until college. And it is something that stays with me today. It's not others harping on me to advocate, it's myself continuing to push me to be able to advocate in my career journey and more. And I didn't really know what this word advocate meant. I kind of shrugged it off as there's more important things to learn. I need to figure out this technology. I need to know how I'm going to get a job, all sorts of things. But advocating was really this major unlock to learning how to communicate what I need so I could participate in the things in school, in internships, in jobs, in my career now. And it's something that stays with me today. And I thought that some of the hardest things would be learning my assistive technology or learning how to do school with my dealing with my vision loss, finding a job. But it really is knowing how to advocate for the things you need, how to best communicate so that you can participate. And we'll get into defining these terms, but I have really found these skills to be so foundational to the things I've been able to, graduate college early with a very high GPA and work in marketing and now work in the mountain bike industry and now working for Clusiv and achieve many things in sports. And I say those things to say the reason I've been able to do them is my ability to advocate, learning how to communicate, and being able to, in the end, participate in the things that I wanted to. So I find these really important areas that are not always talked about, but we want to give insight into those foundational skills. And so, Laverne, do you want to real quick kind of share your personal story in terms of how you've seen the power of these soft skills and in your career, how you've seen the importance with others you've worked with?
Yeah, definitely. So a few things. I'm going to give us some examples as well, but just know that these are more, we say skills, but it comes down to more of being an art. And you will always be revising how you advocate and how you communicate, because it'll be that, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done it that way, or hey, that worked out great. So, and Blake will talk more about that as we go along. I lost my vision when I was 2 due to a eye condition called retinoblastoma, which is a cancer of the eye. So I've been dealing with this a long time as far as self-advocacy and communicating, but we all hear it, advocate, advocate, advocate. So how do you do that? Well, I'm going to give a couple examples. A few years back when I got my 6th guide dog, I was in Oregon in the airport waiting for them to escort me to the gate. I keep looking at my watch. It's getting closer and closer to time for the plane to take off, and nobody's coming. And they have a few of us sitting there who need some assistance of various types to get to our gate. And I said to one of the employees at the counter, I said, "Hey, I'm getting close to crunch time here. I need some help." This other lady stands up and starts yelling at people on my behalf. And I said to her, and I said to the counter attendant, I don't know who this person is, and she is not with me. I'm speaking for myself. Um, and it was really an important thing to do because I did not need somebody taking over my situation. So I feel pretty good about that one. Another scenario that I had rather recently, I don't feel so strong about. I was at the grocery store. I happened to have a large denominational bill. It was $100 to pay for the groceries, handed it to the clerk. The clerk went and, they have to check and make sure it's real and get changed because they don't keep lots of money in cashiers in the cash drawer anymore. And when he's counting back the money to me, he's yelling it. And I was so taken aback, I didn't say anything. I just like, you're really going to announce to the whole store how much change I'm getting? And I walked away and I thought later, I really should have said something, but I did not. So it's not always perfect. It's not always going to go like you want. The important thing is to learn from it and assess the results. We're not going to always analyze our life throughout, but when you have a strong result, whether it's good or bad, go with it. Use that skill set. All right, Blake, back to you.
Awesome. Absolutely. Great examples, Laverne. And so we just wanted to share context on some of our stories and experiences. And there are some that we shared, so many that we didn't. But just want to make sure you know kind of who you're listening to in this process. And yeah, this, like Laverne said, these are things that we're still continuing to learn. So we're all going to kind of be learning and discussing together. So now I want to kind of have us go through each of these three soft skills of advocating, communicating, and participating. And keep in mind, these are all going to be like a cycle that feeds into one another, but we want to define each one and give some examples of each so that you can get a better understanding of how each of these play into one another, what they are. And for each soft skill, we're going to be talking about a day-to-day life example where you would see this, a education or training scenario you may come across, and then an employment example. This can go from simple to more complex, but honestly, the day to day ones could even be the most complex at times. But we just want to make sure we give different examples, build upon one another towards employment, and make sure we give examples in different areas so that we can make the most sense of these topics. Awesome. So, first, for advocating. The definition that we want to go with, that we kind of came up with, is expressing what you need to overcome a barrier. Keep in mind, this definition of advocating is, like Laverne said, self advocacy. This isn't advocating similar to what advocacy groups would to advocate or lobby for a certain issue. This is self advocacy. The issues that affect us directly and learning how to best express, figure out what you need to overcome a certain barrier, and knowing how to best do that in what situations. And this is an important first step because we sometimes have a barrier that we can figure out and know is in front of us, but we've never come across it before. So, how do we even know what to express what we need to overcome that barrier? So, that's what we kind of want to, the definition we want to go off of, and we could dive into now just some examples here. So, the scenarios that we're going to go for the day to day life, I'm just going to kind of paint a picture for you. And in this scenario, just imagine family members are rearranging your room to clean and they move key items in your room to, in their mind, or I won't even go there, but they move certain items in your room to clean up and organize, but it ends up putting your key items out of place that you end up not being able to quickly find, will cause some confusion and delays in navigating your room. I've definitely been there before. I'm sure this is something we can relate to. And we, just to kind of go past that a little bit, looking at what is the barrier in this process. In this example, I would say the barrier is that there are misplaced items that are causing confusion, delays in being able to navigate your environment that you have set up in a way that makes sense to you. But the barrier is someone came in and misplaced things and changed that process. So, if we want to look at advocating in this example, we want to first look at, okay, what's a good example and what would be a bad example of a response. So, to first go for the good examples, Laverne, what would be an effective way to advocate a solution to this problem?
So a couple of things one could do is really share with their family members or whoever's rearranged things the amount of time it can take to find something when you can't see. Um, in my world, if something is moved, it can be an inch away and it might as well be in a different universe. And I can spend 15 minutes looking for something that someone has, can walk in a room and see immediately. So sharing that, hey, I know you're trying to be helpful. This is really difficult for me, and this is why this is really difficult for me. Can we come up with a different system? Um, organize this so folks understand that this needs to go back where it was and why that's important. So really not bottom line is, I don't know about all you, but when somebody's moved my stuff and I have to look for it, I get kind of frustrated. So that's probably not the moment to go have a conversation. Give yourself a few minutes to regroup and then say, hey, can we talk about this? I appreciate your help. However, this is what it's doing for me.
Yes. No, absolutely. And to that point, this is definitely something that is going to be frustrating because Laverne doesn't have a spaceship to travel to the other universe of wherever her item was moved. That may just be an inch away, to your point. And so, since this can be frustrating, examples of how a bad response of advocating would be, and some of these may be obvious and some we can find ourselves slipping into when we talk about these bad examples. But just to be clear, a bad example of advocating would be accusing family members of intentionally trying to cause an inconvenience for you, or uh, implying that they were trying to bother you or be rude to you, and assuming their intentions. When in the good response, we talked about understanding that they may just trying to want to help organize, and we can invite people into that process and have a gentle conversation to be able to find a solution for it. Also, if you use an angry or rude language to be able to express your frustration, that is just going to make people frustrated at you as well. And like Laverne said, if you're frustrated and you instantly are going to try to advocate for the solution, not always going to be the best time, and putting some space between it is definitely helpful. Cool. So to build upon the advocating, we're going to go through an example with training or an education environment. And in this scenario, just imagine if you have a teacher, a professor that is using paper assignments for the class, and they delay posting this assignment online, or they delay posting the PowerPoint. They don't understand that the material is ideally accessible for you, or they don't work with the department to help make things accessible, and they just aren't understanding your process. This has definitely happened before, and I'm sure others can relate, as with many of these examples. So, to address the barriers of this situation, you're facing inaccessible materials, which is kind of the most literal things, and also you don't have as much time to get things done due to the delay. There is a lack of understanding from your professor of or teacher of your situation. So, Laverne, what would be a good example of how to advocate for some of these things?
First of all, you'll want to outreach to that professor or teacher and schedule some time to sit down with them. I would encourage you, if you can, to take your laptop if you have one. I use Braille a lot, so I would take some Braille materials, do some education, but also gain some understanding. What are the barriers for them? Why is it taking, and I wouldn't ask it quite like this, but what gets in the way of them getting the information onto the online portal sooner? Is there some strategies that you both can work out that meets your needs, but doesn't alienate the professor? Yes, we all know that things need to be accessible. That really goes back in the education systems, particularly public education, to 1973, as well as the ADA. But throwing laws up right away in people's faces doesn't get you to the end goal as easily and as quickly and with this the additional supports that can make the experience more positive than if you sit down and try to gain an understanding of here's what I need, here's why I need it, what do you need, and why do you need it, and how can we make this work?
Boom. I love that last sentence. I think it's a great summary of those conversations. And something I had to learn in college was to always set up those meetings with professors to go through those things. And man, was it really uncomfortable a lot of the time. And a lot of times they were confused, didn't know what to do. And I had to advocate and know, what do I even need? And sometimes we don't know what we need. And to what Laverne said, you got to understand where they're at so you can better understand where they may have some barriers, some challenges, and you can address those together and better understand what it even is that you need in that process to advocate for those things. And some bad examples of how you could respond to this situation and trying to advocate would be relying too heavily on others to communicate with the professor, relying on maybe an academic advisor that you work with, the disability support services, basically making anybody else speak to the professor on your behalf. Obviously, there are certain circumstances where this would be beneficial, but really the majority of the time, it should be directly from you to the professor advocating on your own behalf. As again, this is self advocacy, so we want to be doing it ourselves. Um, and also, if in the process of advocating, if you're going to be speaking negatively about the teacher or professor to others without addressing the professor themselves indirectly, that's not going to be a helpful way to advocate. It's good. This is where sometimes there could just be drama created. And also, a bad example of advocating would just be if you don't say anything. Obviously, that could be kind of obvious, but sometimes it could be easier to not do something, not speak up, but really important to make sure you do speak up. It's so uncomfortable. It still is uncomfortable to have these conversations myself in many areas of life, but sometimes it gets a little less uncomfortable. But the outcome is so worth it, especially as we work towards the soft skill of participating.
And the other
So,
piece to that,
sorry,
sorry,
go ahead,
Blake,
Laverne.
is it's important, particularly in a education or training setting, um, not to jump up and make a scene. It will drive people away from you. Scheduling time with the professor, trainer, um, whoever it is that you need to work with, lab technician, is really your best approach to getting to a middle ground where your needs are met.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a good point for education in so many areas. And sometimes there's times where you advocate and it's uncomfortable. I've had times where, uh, I have to advocate and maybe others are unsure, or there's basically advocacy that may have to happen with peers in your classroom as well. But again, there's so many different examples that can happen. So, for the example of employment, the scenario that we're going to use is a boss is unsure about your capabilities for a certain task and with making sure you have struggles with getting you the right technology for a setup that you need in your office. The barriers in this process would be similar to the professor situation, a lack of understanding from your boss, and also dealing with unresolved technology challenges that affect your efficiency at your job. So, um, in terms of advocating for good examples, again, with the professor situation, scheduling time and being intentional to meet with your boss and discuss the challenges that you are having by first making sure you're an active listener and communicating what it is that your capabilities are, and not so that you are proving yourself, and this doesn't have to be done over and over, but when necessary, having transparency on how you may navigate certain tasks is important, and to clarify with your boss where there may be any concerns of how you may navigate certain tasks. And in this process, I think it's important to understand you don't have to advocate and explain how you do every single thing. But the biggest thing to share in something like this would be saying, I can do the same thing somebody else can. I'm just may do it a different way. And these are some challenges I may face along the way. And it's up to me to communicate those to you. I will keep you posted on what those are to address some of those areas of concern. Also, explaining a bit about uh, in terms of the area where you want to make sure you have the right technology, expressing certain solutions that you could find about getting the right technology for you, whether that's something that you can maybe you have at home that you could just bring to the office. Maybe there's an external monitor that you need that nobody is using, or maybe it's as simple as you need a desk that's not by the window because it's too bright. I think if you are addressing the challenges you have, but helping bring up and provide the solutions is going to be the biggest thing to help navigate that. Laverne, what other areas do you think are ways that you could would be a good example of advocating in a situation like this?
Having information, knowing the process for requesting equipment, that may go through HR. There may be an ADA coordinator, knowing how that works. But most importantly, you have to know the details of the project so you know what accommodation to request. So it really becomes an information gathering venture along with communicating with your supervisor and maybe even your colleagues. But being informed yourself, don't expect that other people know what you need because they don't, nor is it anybody's place to say, hey, Blake, you need to use Fusion. No matter what, you need to use that because obviously you have a visual impairment. So you need to use that. We don't want anybody speaking up for us like that because they're most likely going to be wrong unless they're an assistive technology specialist. So know what you need, know what you use, make sure you can use it.
Mic drop. Yeah, the great points to bring up. And in terms of bad examples of advocating in this situation, again, if you're going to criticize the boss or accuse them of discriminating or that they are just out to get you, whatever that may be, is not going to most effectively accomplish the situation, and at times could make them be more distant or afraid to approach the situation as well. Also, if you're going to share, just speak negatively about the boss with coworkers that aren't going to affect the situation, it's going to make the colleagues uh, not be sure how to maybe work with you. And when those challenges come up, plus it could just, it's not going to resolve the problem and make more conflict. Lastly, if you just fail to address just the conversation at all, if you are dealing with technology issues, something with your office setup, and it's slowing your productivity, but you just don't speak up about it, you're going to be less productive. The problem's probably going to get worse, and it's just delaying conversations that are going to need to happen. So, just a couple examples where it would be not the best advocating. Awesome. Cool. So now we went through those examples of advocating, and we want to now move through communicating. And this is going to build off of advocating because to define things, to give a definition for communicating, uh, especially based on this conversation, I would say it's the means of advocating and it affects how well you're able to advocate for what you need. So when I say the means of advocating, the way that you're actually going to advocate to somebody is by communicating to them. And a lot of the examples, I would maybe say express or something similar to that. But a lot of times, when you know what you need to advocate for, once you start actually doing that in conversations with people, it then turns into communication. So this is a word a lot of us hear, and it's going to be so important in for anybody. But these are just there's going to be unique things that we need to learn as people in the blind community, just how to best communicate in these situations. So we're going to be using the same scenarios of the day-to-day life, training, and education, and the employment examples. So again, for the day-to-day life example of when people rearrange your room and there's the barriers of not being able to navigate your room in the same manner. Laverne, what would be some ways that you could have good communication with family in this situation?
So again, take a few minutes to regroup and then e- approach them to first find your thing. And of course, it's going to be depend on time. I mean, we're talking about perfect world scenarios, right? We all know that life is life, and you can't always stop the train and say, "Hey, we got to find my stuff, and can we please talk?" Sometimes it's just a, "Hey, can you help me find this right now? And I need to talk to you about this later because of time constraints." Or, "Will you please come help me find this and let's talk about um, when you're cleaning my room, when you're helping organize, how this will work best for me and what you're seeing." Because sometimes, when it's your own room, it doesn't matter. But when it's an office space, sometimes how things are set up for you um, may not present well. For example, even it doesn't matter if you have a visual impairment or not. Some folks just like to stack stuff. Okay. But when you walk in as a customer and everything is stacked, that may not be a great presentation. So again, you're communicating your need. I need my stuff to be here. But you also want to learn about why are they changing stuff? I mean, why do they feel compelled to rearrange your world? Um, so it's
Yes.
it's an interaction. Communicating is not one way. And remember, there's verbal communication and then there's body language. And if your mouth is trying to say, "Hey, I want to work this out," but your face is saying, "I want to rip your head off," that's not going to get you very far.
Yes. No, that's really good to bring up. There's definitely different things of the nonverbal versus verbal that are going to really affect the communication. And in this process, especially with family, it's going to, there's going to be times where we're going to have to remind people they're going to do things again. We're going to see this in all the examples, but I think this is where communication is something that is so constantly being refined. Advocating can sometimes be, we can more quickly know what we need, but for communicating, for example, I think of when we're always trying to explain our vision to somebody. It can sometimes be a continual process of figuring out what's the best spiel, how to best effectively communicate things to get the outcome of participating that we want. And sometimes you may have to explain things different ways to your family in this type of situation. And then in terms of bad communication, uh, if you're going to be timid or let others disregard what you're saying, since you are being timid in your approach, not confident in your tone, people may not take you seriously. And speaking gently but confidently is really important to make sure you can end up participating the way you want. And obviously, if you are frustrated and quickly respond and are yelling, raising your voice, or being angry, whether verbally or non-verbally, just going to continue the problem at hand.
What
So
happens
for
too, sorry,
Go ahead.
Blake, what
No worries.
happens too when you're when you're angry and try to approach something, action causes reaction. So you may be really frustrated that you can't find whatever you were looking for in your room. You start yelling at somebody, then you may not get the help you need to find it. So again, taking a couple deep breaths, getting the situation resolved, and then communicating the problem might be the strategy. Is that like 100% of the time how you handle it? No, because scenarios change how you handle the situation.
Absolutely. Awesome. So for the training or education example, again, that is going to be where a teacher or a professor is using paper assignments or they delay putting up PowerPoint content online, materials aren't accessible. The barrier is they don't understand your situation. You're not able to access your coursework as well. In terms of how you could best communicate in this situation, this is where you're going to have to start uh, slightly differently from family, is really being mindful of how you compose yourself in a way that is professional, in the tone that you have, being confident, in the posture that you may have, being upright, and when speaking with them. And especially since in this situation, you may not, you're going to not know this person as well. You may not really know them much at all. And it's really important that you have that confidence in your tone when speaking with them to have the effective communication. Important piece of communicating too is listening. As you listen, you're going to be able to understand where they're at and knowing the areas where you may have to ask another question. And a big part of communication is asking those questions to have further points of understanding. And as you better listen, you can ask better questions and you can communicate better solutions and have an inviting tone that allows you to be able to cooperate and find a solution together, and also makes you just feel approachable with the professor and working together. As you use active listening, you are asking questions and collaborating together in the end result.
And I also want to add that we are not by any stretch of the imagination saying take results or solutions that will not work for you. So if somebody were to offer up, well, then I'll just give you the paper assignment the day before. If that's not going to work for you, you're going to have to go back to your toolbox of communicating and say, that approach isn't going to work for me, and here's why. So we're
Yeah.
not telling you to be, a rug on the floor, but we're also not telling you to be a blazing fire.
Yes, somewhere in the middle there. Yeah, I think it's good. At times you're gonna have to push back and figure out the solution, but doing it respectfully is so important. And then in terms of bad communication, if you are gonna acting like nothing is wrong when you're talking with them, it would be non-productive, and you're going to have to be confident in addressing that there is a challenge. But if you express it in a way that you're angry and you don't say anything, that's not going to uh, get things anywhere. Or if you use um, a tone that is just more abrupt and confrontational, or you fail to listen in the process, not good communication. Or if you communicate blame or have excuses, uh, it's not going to be effective. So, to quickly go through the communication example for employment, again, this is where the boss is unsure of your capabilities. You may not have the right technology in your setup. Good communication in this process is going to be so similar to the education example. You want to make sure that you speak professionally, you are confident, you are assertive where you may need to steer certain correction. Your body language is a posture that is confident and upright. When you're communicating, you are continuously adjusting and evolving what you are communicating. because with an employer, you may be there much longer than with a professor. If problems persist and you keep communicating the same thing, nothing happens. You got to evolve your communication and use different styles, share different things, come up with different solutions because you may come up with a solution that you communicate. Maybe it doesn't work out. You got to keep communicating and come back to something that may work well to solve that problem. Also, you may have to work and communicate with multiple people in the process that would be necessary to get to the outcome that you want to participate in. Laverne, what would you say would be bad examples of communicating in a employment situation?
So a couple of bad examples, and it actually can get you fired, is to straight up tell the boss you're not going to do it. Um, you've got to communicate what the barrier is and what the problem is. You can't just deny doing a task at work unless it's totally outside the scope of your job duties. That denying to do a task that's within your job duties really can fall under insubordination, and so they can let you go. The other issue is not communicating, as Blake said. If you're not communicating your needs and your production goes down and the quality of your work goes down, then when you say, hey, I have accommodation issues, but you're already on a performance improvement plan, you will still be on the performance improvement plan. However, they have to provide you the accommodation before that plan is completed and finalized as far as your production abilities. So there are consequences to um, your actions at work. If you don't speak up, there's consequences. If you speak out of turn, there could be consequences. So again, know what you need. Gather information if you don't know what you need. Seek out your resources.
Absolutely. No, great points. And to wrap up the communication topic, if you do want to learn more about essential communication skills for the modern workforce, at Clusiv, we do have a course on this topic. As you know, Clusiv, we have a variety of courses that help equip you for employment as someone who's blind or visually impaired. If you want to learn more about that, feel free to reply to any of the emails that have been sent out, or you can go to our website www.clusiv.io, clusiv.io, and you can learn more information, fill out a form, and we can get back to you. Plus, I can share more information in the follow up email, but I just wanted to make sure I made note about that for those who want to learn more about communication and many of the things talked about. And so we have a little under 10 minutes here, or a little 12 minutes here. So I'm going to go through participate quickly to make sure that we have time for questions at the end. But participate is going to be the quickest. And I kind of, with all of this said so far on advocating and communicating, the goal is participating. And participating, I would define as being able to achieve a desired outcome and involvement by effectively advocating and communicating to be able to overcome the barriers and be involved in the desired outcome. So, again, I would just say achieving desired outcomes and involvement by effectively advocating, communicating, and overcoming barriers. So, what does advocating look like in the day to day life example? A positive outcome would be to best participate in navigating the day to day activities simply in your room in a time that is efficient, organized, and minimizes frustration, since there are plenty of other areas of life that can cause frustration. Plus, it enables you to have better engage in other family activities, have better relationships with your family, and just be able to achieve the desired outcome and be involved in more day to day tasks around the home in a way that is organized and simple for you. To participate in the training or education example, as you advocate and communicate, the positive outcomes would be you can have a more equal opportunity to learn and engage in the class, where your focus is not just advocating, making content accessible, it's learning, which it should be, and you can effectively participate as a learner. You can also stay on track and have a more equitable education experience. Plus, you can have just better relationships with your professors, with your cowork, with your other students, and you're going to carry these skills. It's so similar to employment, so it carries on with you as well. Effective participation in employment, when working through challenges, communicating with your boss, or certain technology related issues. This will allow you to better participate by performing the assigned work duties to the best of your ability without the barriers in the way. You can build a better relationship with your boss. As you perform better, it will allow you to grow and move up in your career because you know how to advocate and communicate things that may not be related to your vision, but may just be about aligning on your responsibilities or advocating for a new opportunity, whatever it may come up. Plus, you gain skills about being able to engage conflict, solve problems, which is really the biggest part of professional development in your career. So, important to know just before we jump into questions and answers here, or just having conversation, you're always going to be learning about these things. Laverne and I are dealing with these things day in and day out. And we learn to support one another, laugh about it at times, and we're always getting better at it. You won't be perfect. We won't be perfect. You really just got to show up and try. Awesome. So, thank you so much for listening to all that. We know that was a lot, as this topic can be dense and have a lot of different things to cover. But we do want to make some of the time for any questions that anyone may have.